Welcome, Self-Made Nation, CEO, founder, business owners, to the Cash Rich Exit podcast. I'm Colleen O'Connell Campbell, wealth advisor at RBC Dominion Securities, and your host. Today, we're exploring that new path to legacy and longevity in Canadian business, the Employee Ownership Trust. We've talked about it here a number of times now on the podcast. Joining us today is Aaron Schroeder, CEO of Brightspot Climate, a leader in greenhouse gas consulting and emissions strategy. Instead of choosing the traditional exit, Aaron is one of the few companies so far who's pioneering this Canadian transition into an EOT, a model that puts ownership in the hands of the team while preserving the mission of the business. We'll explore why he made this decision, what it means in consulting firms and for founders at large here in Canada, and how other Canadian entrepreneurs can consider EOTs as a succession strategy that's value aligned. If you're planning your eventual exit, or simply want to ensure your business thrives without you, have a listen. And remember, if you'd like a better understanding of your own wealth gap as part of your future exit, reach out for a one-on-one wealth gap analysis with me. All right, let's meet Aaron. Self-Made Nation, I'd like to introduce you to Aaron from Brightspot Climate. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Of course, I've shared a little intro, Aaron. So why don't we, jump right in and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then about Brightspot Climate, and then we can talk about EOTs, which is really why I brought you on the show.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I like to start my story back from where I grew up. I grew up on a dairy farm in rural Saskatchewan, and that's where entrepreneurship really uh, was my first opportunity to be an entrepreneur. Was back on the farm with my family. We worked hard and grew the farm over the years. I studied entrepreneurship in high school and university because I was interested in this concept of working with other people and growing something together.
Mhm.
So after I studied engineering at the University of Saskatchewan and started my career in climate change and climate change engineering, I was working with a big consulting company and learning the ropes of how consulting works, learning how business works in Canada, and working with a number of players in the large industry and municipalities and government, really getting my feet wet. But always thinking about entrepreneurship, and even within the consulting firm, I think I was an entrepreneur, building things and changing the way that the company did work. When it came time for me to leave, I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, but I fell into a great opportunity to continue consulting, but on my own.
Mhm.
And within a couple of years, I'd hired a couple people and started to grow Brightspot Climate. 10 years later, or just over 10 years ago now, we're over 40 people. We have offices in three cities. And through that time, growing the company, I was always thinking about how the people in the company were a really critical part of it. And maybe that, kind of led to
Mhm.
the beginning of me thinking about employee ownership.
Right. You told an interesting story at the employee ownership conference where I heard you speak. So maybe we'll touch on that at some point. But what does Bright Spot Climate do, and who do you serve? Because I think that is helpful in terms of as we go down the path of exploring the employee ownership trust structure, and why that's a good fit for a company like yours.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, we work in the climate change space. We work with big industry primarily on quantifying, reporting, and verifying their greenhouse gas emissions. So, in Canada, all large industry is required to do that annually, report their emissions to government, and then look for ways to reduce emissions. And reducing emissions has a number of co-benefits: reducing energy consumption, saving money. So we work with industry on implementing new technology so that they can reduce their emissions, and really to achieve those goals that the government has set out for our country to become net zero by 2050. We also work with government directly on developing policies and analyzing new policies. We work with municipalities and universities and all everybody that's engaged in this climate change space. So I like to tell our team, we're the behind the scenes engineers that are helping make this work. The government sets the policy, and we're doing the hard work behind the scenes, working with industry to make that happen.
And it's really a very people intense type of work in the what you're doing in terms of the consultancy.
It is. And, we work with people within these companies that have a similar idea. They want to see large industry reduce its carbon intensity. So the people that we're working at the oil and gas company or the power company have that similar mindset. It's a fairly small group of people in Canada that work in this climate change space, whether they're working right directly with industry or in government or like us in consultancy. But people that are pretty passionate about what they do, pretty technically driven, and want to focus on technologies and policies that will lead to real results.
All right. So that's Brightspot, who you are and who you're serving. If we do the loop back, you started the firm as yourself, a single consultant, and then grew it. And you had this thread, this idea all along the way that you wanted not only for yourself to get the rewards of entrepreneurship, but also your team. So can you share your your moment of really kind of, you called it a Jerry Maguire moment, if I recall correctly,
Yeah,
with your
that's
team.
right.
And this was sort of in the infancy of this idea, though, really, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like you mentioned, I started the company by myself, but my sister joined me pretty early.
mhm.
Michelle has a degree in agriculture and is professional agrologist. So she works on the agriculture side. So she and I have kind of batted this idea around a long time, going back to the farm again. But in 2022, approximately 2022, one day, I said to myself, I think it's time for me to share my vision with the team. I don't know what mechanism we're going to use for employee ownership yet, but I want to share with the team that I'm committed to it.
Hmm.
So I wrote this letter late at night, just like in the movie, and shared it with the team the next morning. And really, in the letter, I shared exactly that. I shared how I felt like the accumulation of wealth amongst a few people is a very big problem in the world, if not one of the largest problems in the world, and how in our small corner of the world we could address that with employee ownership. And circulated that letter, and it was received with it was received positively.
But
I think
with some trepidation too.
perhaps because we didn't have a pathway for how employee ownership was going to work.
Hmm.
We have already had a project level profit sharing program in the company that was, a de facto employee ownership. Everybody was participating in that program. Uh, but this was a move to something a little bit bigger. And without a direct mechanism, there were a lot of questions in the company about what that would look like. I asked everybody just to trust me that we would look and research that together and figure it out together.
So how did you happen upon the EOT structure? Was it something as part of your research, or was it kind of coincidence at some point, or did somebody else on your team, a lawyer, accountant, some other professional bring it to your attention?
Yeah, no, it was just part of, our research looking for different opportunities. I'd spoken with a couple people that were in the know that mentioned that legislation was potentially on the horizon. So then, with news articles and other things that were starting to give some details around what that legislation might look like, I was watching quite closely. Um, and once we had some details around the fact that, the EOT, the Employee Ownership Trust mechanism, that might be coming into effect, would include everybody in the company without anybody having to put any money up front. That was a light bulb moment for me where I thought, this mechanism is what will work for us because it checked the boxes. You check those particular boxes.
Right. So once you learned that this was a possibility, and here is this, moment of, I want to share the wealth. And now there's a mechanism to do that. How did you bridge the gap between, practically putting in motion? Because Brightspot became part of this EOT structure. Was it spring of last year, or
Yeah.
remind
April
me?
1st,
April
5, yeah.
1st. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so once the legislation was underway, it would not even through the House yet, but it looked pretty clear that it was going to. That's when we really started talking internally about what that might look like. Um, we waited until it was actually through before we actually, put pen to paper. But right around that time, I immediately went to the legal counsel that we had arranged and started talking about what might this look like. What are the steps? Could we put a timeline together? So we really started thinking it through once legislation was passed.
That legal team that you went to, was it the first legal team that you went to, or did you have to source out after, a number of interviews to find a team that was on board with going down this pathway with you? I didn't actually
Yeah.
prep you for that question, but it's come to
No,
mind
that's
as
okay.
we're talking. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we have a good relationship with Blake's. We have through our history, and we found a partner at Blake's who was keenly interested in this. She works specifically with trusts and had been following the legislation. So when I met with her initially, it felt like a great match right off the bat.
Because that's one of the things I'm finding. I was really introduced to the EOT structure in the fall of 2024. I saw the announcement in the budget, but didn't really overly think much about it. And then I had sort of this opportunity. I connected with Jennifer Williams of Firefly Insights, who you may have met at the Employee Ownership Conference, and then Tiara Letourneau of Rewrite Capital. And they've been guests here on the podcast, and got talking with them and learning more about it, and speaking with a colleague in the US where they've had similar structure for a long time. Not that we haven't had employee ownership, right? But this particular structure with all the features around it, the tax exemption, but also the ability for employees to become part of it without an out-of-pocket expense on their part, right? So I'm still finding, fast forward, we're recording March of 2026, and there's still a lot of people who don't know much about the EOT structure, and we're coming up to some like pretty significant sunset clause deadline. If it, lots of lobbying happening. I know that you've contributed to a news article that CBC put out in January of this year. Um, that's why I was curious about what kind of buy-in you had when you approached the legal team. What about from an accounting team perspective? Did you have to make any adjustments there, or search out an accounting team that was on board with whatever structural changes you needed to make from an accounting perspective?
Yeah, we did. There were many things happening at the time, and this
Hmm.
is kind of probably preempting one of your future questions about what I would make sure we get in place. Speaking of accounting, one thing that we needed to do was just, uh, try to change some of our accounting policies to make sure that we were in a place where we could work with financing as well. So we're working with MMP, and they were really great about getting us to where we needed to be. Just some of that housekeeping stuff that has to get done when you move from a sole proprietor or a sole owner of a corporation to, having a board and then moving and being owned by a trust. There are certain things that you need to get done.
Hmm.
So, if I had it to do again, I would have started those things earlier because they take time before the EOT. So, in fact, we were doing them all coincidentally, and it was more complicated to do everything at the same time just because there's only so many hours in a day. But
And
MMP was really.
you're still actually providing the consultancy
Yeah,
services.
that's right. Yeah. During a time like if you might recall, during 2025, climate change was a bit of a tumultuous issue. It was,
Yeah.
had gone from the front burner to way in the back burner. So there was a lot happening in the company too, where there was some
Hmm.
trepidation around, what is really happening here. So we were managing that and working through that as well.
Can you think of any other challenges that you've faced that would be things to highlight for um, somebody listening who is considering the EOT structure?
Yeah, governance. So I
Mm-hmm.
alluded to it a moment ago, but we didn't have a board of directors prior to EOT, and you must be governed by a board in order for to use the legislation. Had to do it again, I would definitely put a board in place earlier, so that board would have had the opportunity to, get their feet under them and, understand the operations of the company before we're going to thrust them into that, as well as understanding what the change in ownership would be and establishing that governance. It's, for me, it was also a change because I went from being the sole decision maker, with an
Mm.
advisor, a senior leadership team that was advising me, to now being governed by a board and having the senior leadership team have decision-making authority. That all happened at the same time. So it was a lot of change all simultaneously. So had it to do again, I would have spaced those things out with changes in governance and accounting systems happening first, and then change in ownership.
Mhm. Um, from the perspective of, has there been something that has been surprisingly positive, something that you hadn't expected out of the process that comes to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I like calling it a co-benefit, and it's the entrepreneurship again that's being felt from the team.
Hmm.
I didn't expect that we would have, a number of people step up and really be that interested in helping to run the company or think more from an entrepreneur's lens. But it's really been really fascinating to watch. We have a number of very young people in the company, right out of university, and a lot of new grads come to work with us, and many of them are very interested in innovating and helping run the company. So I expected there would be some of that, but I think the level of enthusiasm I'm experiencing is beyond what I had expected.
So that's a nice offset to some of the challenges and making
Yeah,
them, more bearable, I
absolutely.
suppose, right? Awesome.
Yeah.
Um, what about this aspect of loss of control? Uh, from going from, the basically having, I'm gonna guess like a veto power, really. Like you have the input from this senior management team, but essentially, the buck stops with you,
Right.
or it's like, I'm the boss, I said so. It doesn't sound like you ran the company in that way, but there's still, pretty significant mindset. Maybe you can share a little bit about how you've been managing around that, what you might, knowing what you know now, what are some things you might have been able to do for yourself, or you might suggest to somebody stepping into this type of situation to think about and consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And not everybody's going to be in the same situation I am. I
Mhm.
would very specifically went from, a sole decision maker to having a board. Other companies going through EOT might already have a well-established board and governance and all those things. But
Mhm.
but I can speak to my experience. There were two aspects that have been challenging that I've had to adapt to around control. One of them is the level of risk that I'm willing to take as the sole owner
Mm.
versus the risk that a board is willing to take. That's different. That's very different. So I had to adjust to that. The second is just the speed at which decisions can be made. Our board. Our board has to do their due diligence, and they have other work that they're doing. They're not full-time board members. So the speed at which decisions can be made is different as well, and I've had to adjust to that. And I think I have for the most part, knowing that decisions are coming up down the road, I'm putting timelines in place to make sure there's sufficient buffer and time to bring board members up to speed. But there are days where a decision needs to be made quickly, and I need to adapt to that as well. So those two things, kind of the risk and the speed, are the two aspects of control that have been most challenging. For me personally, I've felt fine about the fact that I'm not the sole decision maker already. I grappled with that when I decided to go down this road,
Mhm.
and it's been fine. But it's really around risk taking, and risk levels that there's comfort with that I sometimes am in disagreement with the board, which I think is normal.
Yeah. So risk levels, risk taking, and the time that it takes to go through the process, not so much the full-on relinquishing of the one who makes the final decision. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Trying to think here. I had another question, and I just lost it. That's okay. Um, what? what other advice might you give to a business owner th contemplating this type of structure? Oh, actually stop. I'm going to stop for a second. I remember the question. It was around the board and how
Hmm.
you went about recruiting to find the right people to be on that board. Um, you know, I suspect there was some type of matrix of we're looking for these types of skills, we're looking for this type of background. Who do we know or who do we need to know? Tell us a little bit about how you were able to recruit your board.
Yeah, we were looking for people that had specific skills so that we could complement the skills that I have, and people that would have some board experience potentially. We worked through our networks, so we spoke to people in our networks who we thought might be interested. We did a public posting as well to look for board members, and we had a good response. Since I was the sole owner at the time, I still had the responsibility as the sole director to invite people. So I did that. I invited people and then nominated them to the new board. So we had a good mix of people, and I'm very happy with the people that stepped up for us at this time. Yeah, the first board is doing a really great job. Not sure how long they'll decide to stick around. I hope a little longer so that we can have some continuity into, as board members come and go. But it's been really great so far.
And what are you thinking about next? Because this created, a sense of an exit for you. You're still there in the role of CEO, right?
That's right.
And if you can, if I'm not like going to cause disruption in the company, but I thought when we pre-spoke there that there was some kind of looking to the future.
Yeah, I haven't made any decisions yet, but certainly EOT, was part of my succession plan and gives me that opportunity to think about what I might want to do next. Um, I'm not 50 yet, so I'm still not, let's call it mid-career,
Hmm.
and still have a lot of ideas of things I'd like to explore and try in my career. Not sure yet whether or not I'll do that within Brightspot or if I might, depart and maybe take a year off and think things through and decide what I want to do next. But I do have ideas of other projects that I'd like to chase in this climate change space. I still have a heart for agriculture coming from rural Saskatchewan, so there's a few projects that are percolating that are related to climate change and agriculture that are in my mind.
So there are a lot of possibilities. The future is bright, shall we say?
Yeah, yeah. Something that reminds me, something that one of the senator, or there was a senator at the employee ownership conference who had
Mhm.
supported the legislation, and one of the things he remarked on is that EOT is an opportunity for build more wealth in the country. And I didn't quite know what he meant until I came back home and started thinking further on it.
Mhm.
This idea around building more entrepreneurs in the company, but also the opportunity for EOT to free up entrepreneurs to go back into industry and start another company or do
Mhm.
something else. The succession plan doesn't need to be just leading to retirement, it can be leading to something else. And I think
Absolutely.
that's what he was referring to is this opportunity to build more wealth in the country if we keep companies within the country and free up entrepreneurs to go and do more amazing
To
things.
create new opportunities. Exactly. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think you're right on that. Um, I had two questions about advice, so I'm gonna just like jump into the fun, frank advice piece, which is something I like to ask all my guests for a piece of fun, frank advice for the Self-Made Nation, your fellow CEO, founder, business owners.
Yeah. Something that I did early on that I think was turned out really great was working on financial literacy with everyone in the company. You don't really know where everyone's at, and you don't know where everyone's interests lie. But sharing that information and being more transparent about our finances, even while I was a sole owner, had great rewards. It was certainly challenging because I was sharing information that you wouldn't normally share, especially in the good years and the bad years. You get a lot more questions, and sometimes you get a little bit more fear coming from some of the staff that don't understand. But it's an opportunity for everyone to grow and to grow together.
Mhm.
So I would encourage CEOs to share more financial information than you might normally share, and use that opportunity to grow financial literacy within your team.
Oh, I like that one. That's I think a new one on the podcast. Where can listeners find out more about Bright Spot Climate?
Yeah, our website has a blog on it that many of our team members are posting to, and our LinkedIn account as well. So we're posting on all kinds of issues related to climate change, related to employee ownership, and our passions. So that's a great place to engage with us. You'll find our team members out at conferences and interacting in the community as well. This year, we initiated a community challenge within the company to get more involved in our communities. So it's exciting to see where everybody's interests lie. We have some people that are interested in fast fashion, for example, and what's the
Mm,
climate change impact of fast fashion. Other people are interested in food waste. It's really all over the map where our engineers and agrologists and scientists are placing their time. Depending on where they're at in their life, I suppose.
yeah. Well, that fast fashion one, I can see definitely a younger crew looking at that in depth. Well, it's been really great to showcase Bright Spot and your transition to EOTs, and really appreciate you being here on the show today, Aaron.
Great. Thanks, Colleen. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to meeting many other business owners that are thinking about EOT. I'd be happy to speak with anybody that has this on the mind, maybe grab a coffee at some point.
Great. And how would they find you?
Yeah, you can find me through our website. My email
Okay,
address is on the website, so please check that out and drop me an email.
great. Right. Have a great day.
You too.
Another refreshing look at ownership, succession, and staying true to your mission while stepping back. Aaron Schroeder of Brightspot Climate, they're showing us how values aligned transitions are not just possible, but incredibly powerful, especially now that we have this tool, the Canadian EOT. If you're a founder thinking about long-term succession or how to build a legacy that lasts without sacrificing your team or your impact, consider what we explored today. Connect with me, Colleen O'Connell Campbell, on LinkedIn. Book your one-on-one wealth gap analysis to see how your own exit path might shape out. Please consider subscribing to the Cash Rich Exit podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe here on YouTube. Share this episode with a fellow entrepreneur. Listen, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, for watching, for listening. I'm looking forward to welcoming you back again soon. I'm Colleen O'Connell Campbell, Wealth Advisor at RBC Dominion Securities, and your host, TTFN. Ta-ta for now. Please note, all opinions expressed by me and any guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinion of RBC Dominion Securities. This show is for information purposes only. Before acting on anything you hear or see, consult a qualified professional. I'm a wealth advisor with RBC Dominion Securities, a member of the Canadian Investor Protection Fund.